All right. Good morning. Oh, no, good afternoon. I've already messed up. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Saturday. It's another great Saturday. You are tuning in to Crazy Talk. Crazy Talk is well, not really a podcast. It's a Facebook Live TV show. Hosted by me, Lee Thomas, and we talk about all things mental health related. Mental health is in everything that we do, so we talk to all sorts of different mental health experts, people with mental health experiences, and we just try to, talk about mental health and really emphasize why mental health is important. So thank you so much for tuning in. This is going to be a really great episode. In today's episode, we have Kerri Gaskin joining us. Kerri Gaskin is a mental health counselor from Coverdale Counseling and Consulting, and she is joining us from Coverdale, New Brunswick. For those of you who don't know where Coverdale, New Brunswick is, it is just outside of Moncton. And Kerri, hi, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. It is a spectacular day here. I'm looking at the sun filtering through the trees and thinking great afternoon for snowshoeing or skiing, or actually I don't know how cold it is outside, so it might just be a great day for coffee and hot chocolate and a book.
Yeah, I was like, ooh, snowshoeing, skiing, but instead I've got you stuck inside talking with me. So thank you.
Hey, it's all good.
That. Okay, so Kerri, you're a mental health counselor, as we talked about, and very specific about that role, because in New Brunswick, a lot of helping professions, you have to be very specific in what your role is. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, why you got involved in that work?
Sure. It's kind of been, it sounds a bit corny to say so, but it's been a lifelong journey. I've lived all kinds of different experiences. I've been incredibly fortunate and blessed to have just this incredible range of both positive and negative experiences in my life, both personally and professionally. But in every role that I had over the years, professionally, it seemed that either my colleagues, my peers were coming to me with their concerns, their needs. I was kind of that Dear Abby in the bathroom. Or when I was a teacher, I was a teacher for close to 15 years. My students, I had a revolving door of students coming in to see me. Even though there were counselors on site at the post-secondary institution where I worked, they were coming to me. And it just felt like a really natural progression. So I decided to do my master's in counseling psychology, which I did. And I had in my head and in my heart kind of this idea that I would work in maybe postpartum depression, maybe work with caring professionals who are experiencing some vicarious trauma, some burnout, and so on. And ironically, in my second year, just at the start of my second year, I had my second daughter. And within the first few weeks, I recognized the signs of intense postpartum depression and anxiety. And so I kind of had a big awakening around that experience of accessing services, how hard it can be to access services, the limitations. And it really became evident to me that I was on the right path. So, pushing through postpartum with the help of my awesome husband and my great support system, which I was blessed to have. A lot of people don't have that. And being able to advocate for myself to access services, I got through that, completed my degree, had the opportunity to work with Canadian Mental Health Association for about 9 months. And then decided that I would go into private practice where I would have the flexibility to work with the populations that I felt I was best able to serve.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that personal part of your story. And yeah, that whole idea of accessing services, especially in New Brunswick, can be a real nightmare for a lot of people, even people. And I've been pretty open about my own experiences, my own troubles with accessing services. And I feel like people like us who, have a lot of privilege and also are able to articulate our own needs in a very good way, even we have a hard time accessing services.
For sure. Yeah, like I said, I'm in private practice, but I do keep several slots open for either sliding scale or pro bono clients, because I think it's really important that the most vulnerable populations have access. And in fact, I'm working with CMHA right now to develop a program where I can offer once a week a drop-in mental health counseling service here in Moncton for those who can't access resources elsewhere, because it really is so important that the most vulnerable of our population, those who are in crisis, those who are maybe lacking literacy skills to know where to turn, maybe are struggling with food security or housing security, those people who need help don't always access it. So I've really committed to, in addition to working with my full fee clients, providing some opportunities for those clients as well, because I just think it's so important. So that's my soapbox.
No, I absolutely. And again, like a lot of issues that are not unique to New Brunswick, but are definitely kind of really noticeable in New Brunswick, things like food security, like that's a huge thing, and things like literacy, like, and I'm in no way trying to bash New Brunswick. I absolutely love New Brunswick, but these are issues that, partly because I like really became an adult in New Brunswick, so I just wasn't aware of these issues before, but I also know that these are issues that are like really specific to New Brunswick as well, and sometimes there are things that we don't think about in a mental health context, right?
Absolutely. And I think we don't always make that connection between poverty and mental health issues. But we know statistically that there is a huge connection there, and being aware of that and providing the services for those folks who don't have the resources at their fingertip, who don't have, private insurance, who don't have a family doctor to refer them, making sure that those resources are not just available, but kind of broadcasting their availability, right? So that people know that it's out there. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I kind of find, and this is me getting up on my soapbox, so I'm sorry about this.
That's all good. That's great.
I think it is really important for people to be aware of services, but I sometimes balance that with, I have a lot of frustration around, for instance, like politicians saying, reach out for help is out there, when they are in a position to make more help available, but instead they're putting the onus back on the people who are struggling to say, it's your job to reach out for help. So I'm not really sure how to find a balance or how to strike a balance with those.
I think that's a big challenge. I think you're right, though. I think that, it's really easy to say, oh, here's XYZ services that are available. Why didn't you go to them?
Yeah.
Right? But we know, those of us who have lived with mental health challenges, who have lived with mental illness, who have lived with depression, anxiety, whatever your concern is, we know that when you're in the depths of that, picking up the phone to access that resource is the most exhausting, terrifying. I know when I had postpartum, the thought of picking up the phone to call to make an appointment with a counselor, it probably took me 3 weeks, right? And if I'd been able to just go on my phone or my computer and find someone and send a message, I would have been so much happier than having to leave a voicemail. Like I couldn't do it. So I've made a point of setting my bookings up that anybody can book online. They don't have to call me first. They can go right to the website and call and book, because I just know how debilitating that was for me. But that's also why, like, programs where we go into the community and offer those things on the front line. It's boots on ground that really make a difference, as opposed to sitting in the ivory tower and saying, oh, yes, well, we have all these services. Why didn't you access them? Oh, they're not being accessed. We're going to have to cut them.
Yeah. Ooh. And that's, oh, man.
Yeah, I know. We got a whole nother segment on that, right?
Yeah. So I think that's like a real strength for you as a mental health counselor, right? In that you've been there. Even something as simple as, people can sign up online for an appointment is something that wouldn't necessarily occur to people who hadn't experienced a mental health challenge in the way that you had. So from my perspective, that's like a huge strength of you as a mental health professional also being a person with lived experience. But I know a lot of people who are mental health professionals sometimes feel pressured not to share their own lived experience. Do you have anything to, like, how do you strike that balance, I guess?
I think that's, there is that school of thought that self-disclosure is inappropriate. And I'm really in the mindset of self-disclosure is really important for building a therapeutic relationship, so long as what I'm disclosing as a counselor serves my client. If it benefits their mental health journey, if it somehow eases their path into health, then self-disclosure is totally appropriate. But when a mental health professional is self-disclosing simply to share their story or to one-up or to gain sympathy, then that's highly unethical and inappropriate. And so it is really important to be self-aware and to be mindful of that balance and knowing where that line is and not crossing it. But as long as my story supports my client, then I think it's totally appropriate to share it.
Yeah. Is that, I'm thinking because for a therapeutic relationship, which like I'm not a counselor, I can't really speak to a therapeutic relationship, but I've definitely been that person, kind of the person that you described before when you were, this is people come to me with problems, and I know that it's not really my job to solve them, but I do try to facilitate conversations between the person and themselves. I think it's difficult for, even when I teach mental health first aid, it's difficult for people to know where that line is, that line between I want to share my own experience because I think it will help you, but I don't want you to think that I'm one-upping you or think that I'm, trying to make it about me. Is there, I guess, do you have like any tips for people who might want to share their story with someone who they know is struggling, but don't know how to find that line?
That's a really good question. And I think, there's a couple of different things that are important to think about. As a mental health professional, any mental health professional should be engaged in clinical supervision. So that means that they work with someone who is more experienced in the field, who has a different breadth of knowledge. So I have a clinical supervisor. I check in, and that's a great way to kind of say, am I on the right track here, or did I share too much? Did I share too little? So in terms of the clinical aspect, that's one way that you can kind of gauge that. When it comes to like your friend or your colleague who's coming to you, I think like anything else, it's a skill that requires practice and intuition. Sometimes our intuition, we don't give enough credit to intuition. And just being able to say, I think sometimes when someone comes to us with their story and their concern, sometimes it's enough to just sit with them in their vulnerability. Sometimes, just saying, I don't actually know how you feel. And anybody that tells you they know exactly how you feel is full of it. Because I don't. I have had similar experiences, and so I can empathize with you, and I can sit with you in compassion, and I'm not afraid to be vulnerable with you. But I don't know how you feel, and that's okay. It's okay for you to feel the way you feel, and for you to know that I have a similar experience and can just sit with you in it. And I think maybe that's the way to express the story sometimes is to not make it about, I have the exact same lived experience. We can be twins. More of, you know what? I know you're hurting. I've been hurting before too. And let's sit together. And you can share as much as you want. And if you want to hear my story, I'll share it with you.
Wow. That's really powerful. I really like that. I'm getting the feeling that you're a big Brene Brown fan. Is that fair to say? Brene Brown. Yeah,
I do. I'm very much. I really believe in the power of vulnerability. I really believe in the power of tears, and of laughter. I mean, I'm a punster and I make fun of myself. And I really believe that being vulnerable is the route to compassion.
Which kind of ties back to our idea about like self-disclosure as well, because for you and I know that you're not intending to do this or probably even do this at all, but a lot of the times people do see like, mental health professionals are up here and people who are struggling are down here. And we always are, looking up, like, tell me from on high what I should be doing with my life.
No.
And by self-disclosing and being vulnerable, you're kind of saying, no, like we're both people in this room.
Exactly. I think that there is that misperception, right? Like when we go to our doctor, our family doctor or our dentist or whatever, we expect them to solve the problem. Here's a prescription. Here's a filling. You go to your physiotherapist. Here's the exercises that are going to heal that injury. From my view, and I'm only speaking for myself, right? My perspective as a mental health counselor, I'm not there to solve your problem. That's not my job. What? It's not my job. My job is to sit with you and to facilitate your journey, provide you with the resources that you need, be that sounding board, be that place that's safe, create that safe space where you can come and share what you need to, where you can let out all of that stuff and find a way to make it healthy and productive rather than toxic. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. Oh, you need to do this or this or this. That's not my job. My job is to help you find the thing that's going to work.
Yeah. And that's, I think, such a good way of looking at it. But I guess, do you find people sometimes like struggle with that though? Because like you
Absolutely.
said, like with a doctor or, you know, anything that we see as physical health, even though I'm a big believer, like physical health and mental health are very much
Yeah.
one and the same. But with, you know, we do expect our doctors to, you know, here's a prescription or here's an exercise or here's a lifestyle change or whatever. And we don't really expect them to turn around and say, well, what do you think we should do?
Yeah. So I guess, you know, in my practice, if you were to come in to me as a client and you say, okay, I've got these 5 concerns. And to be very clear, you can have whatever diagnosis. I don't care what your diagnosis is. I care about who you are and what your needs are. And I'm going to look at you as an individual, not as a DSM diagnosis. We treat the symptoms, we treat the needs, the concerns. So when you come into me, you might be looking for solution. So what I might do is ask you some really hard questions. And sometimes, you know, it's uncomfortable, right? But growth is painful and uncomfortable and awkward. And I'll ask you some really hard questions. And then I give homework, you know, can't take the teacher out of me. But what I would do is say, okay, you know, based on what you've shared with me and what you've described as your needs or your desires for change, then here's some work you can do on your own that may be beneficial, right? So that's where my background and my expertise comes into play, is that I know the things that you can do outside of session that will benefit you to really facilitate that growth, as opposed to saying, well, you need to just, you know, end this toxic relationship. It's, well, what would you like to happen?
Yeah. Which I guess is harder.
It's really hard. You know, and it's that whole, well, I want to make a change. I have this goal of change. Well, that's great, but I can't change you. You know, Sally can't change you. John can't change you. Only you can change you.
And that leads really nicely into one of my next questions, which was going to be around, you know, we're creeping up on New Year's. New Year's Eve is what, tomorrow? Oh my goodness.
Oh my golly. Yes.
And so a lot of people are kind of really gung-ho on these New Year's resolutions, right? Like they're like, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. I'm going to get a new job. I'm going to, you know, run a marathon. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. How do you balance that whole idea of you change you, you know, it's not, I can't change you, versus like setting yourself up for failure or setting yourself up to be discompassionate to yourself sometimes?
I think, you know, I think this time of year is hard for so many people and for so many reasons. The holidays can be really challenging. And we have this cultural paradigm around January 1st means everything changes. Suddenly at the stroke of midnight, everything about you that you don't like is going to change. That's horsepacky. Yes, I'm from the country. What do you mean? I think that, you know, we have this notion that if we somehow make it super public, I'm going to post on my Facebook, my Twitter, my every social media account that I have, and tell all my friends that I'm going to lose 20 pounds by April 1st, and that I'm going to quit smoking, and that I'm going to drink less. You know, when we see that stuff, we think that we're making ourselves accountable. But reality is we're setting ourselves up for anxiety, shame, guilt, right? So, because when we don't meet those really broad, huge, life-changing goals, if we don't meet those, then we beat ourselves up and we feel so anxious and guilty and full of shame. So I think that, you know, when we're staring the new year in the face, it's okay to make some resolutions, but let's make them in a really different way. Let's talk about, I'll be kind to myself. I will set healthy boundaries, including with myself. I'm going to resist negative thinking and challenge those automatic negative thoughts, right? I'm going to take action on my life. Not, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, but I'm going to look at things and I'm going to look at myself with compassion, and I'm going to create ways for me to take care of me. Yeah. And I'm going to maybe give myself a social media diet, you know? If we set resolutions in a way that are supporting self-compassion and supporting healthy boundaries and creating opportunities for us to grow, as opposed to these restrictive self-covenants, resolutions can be really positive. But when we create them in terms of massive fundamental change with no support systems in place, with no concept of self-compassion as part of it, they're doomed to failure.
Yeah. And I can see both sides of this in a lot of ways, because I've been that person back with my eating disorder days when I was very sick. I was very much it's New Year's, I'm gonna drink green tea every day and I'm gonna lose 20 pounds and this and that.
Yeah.
And the idea of being more compassionate to yourself as a resolution really resonates with me now, but it's hard to measure.
And you know what? We talk about SMART goals, and those are great and they have their place, but compassion shouldn't have a measure.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion should be about finding those ways to fill our buckets, right? And we all have different ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
One of my biggest ways of filling my bucket is I get up really early before my family. I get up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and I come downstairs when everything else is quiet, and I make a coffee, and I just sit in the quiet, and I watch the sun come up, and I have that quiet time for myself. And it's a half hour where nobody else is moving, but that's the way that I fill my bucket. It's not about, a bubble bath and a spa and, massages 6 times a week, although that would be awesome.
Yeah, who would love that?
I'm bored with that. But it really, so when we try to create those measures around compassion, I think that kind of sets us up for comparisons. And comparisons are so dangerous, right? Like, I talk a lot about the whole social media thing, about stop comparing ourselves to everybody else's snapshot of life, right? So when we start to say, well, Lee gets massages 4 times a week, goes to the gym twice, goes out with their partner, and I just have a coffee every morning. Gosh, I'm not very good at self-compassion. I think that when we create those kinds of measures, it can be really dooming. Whereas if we can say, you know what, this is the thing that really helps me feel good and helps me regenerate and helps me recharge and be a better mom and a better wife and a better therapist. Maybe I should do this thing.
Yeah. Right? And that whole idea of breaking that cycle of comparison, because sometimes comparison, even though it makes us feel bad, it feels really good to feel bad.
Yeah, it's like when you eat that horrible meal that you do the drive-through meal and this is really bad for me, but in that moment, that grease feels awesome, even though I know that it's destroying me inside.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the same thing with our social media comparisons. That comparison to the highlight reel, right?
It's emotional grease.
Exactly, right? I can hear my arteries hardening.
Yeah, and that whole oh my goodness, we are getting close on time, but we're gonna ask a couple more questions.
Okay. Great conversation so far.
Yeah, no, I'm loving it. So that whole idea of social media, because I'm all over social media. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and I run my business through Facebook. I'm everywhere. And so sometimes it can be hard to, again, and we talked about this earlier, finding that line. It can be hard to find that line between does this person inspire me or does this person make me feel bad about myself?
And I think that's a really personal distinction, right? Because it's going to be different for every person. We were talking about Brené Brown, who I love and I follow. But if I were to read her posts every single day and check her Facebook every single day and her Twitter every single day, then I might get exhausted. Right? So for me, I create caps on my social media time as a way to, then that works for me, right? Smartphones go away certain times. We do technology-free Sunday. Those kinds of things. So there's ways for each individual to do that. And you're right, it is a balance, especially if you're trying to run a business that way.
Yes.
Right. And so many of us do that. We use the social media platforms to engage our clients, to engage the people that we want to reach and that we care about. And there is a really fine line there for sure. So it becomes a very personal distinction.
Yeah. And I'm just seeing that we have a comment, and then we're gonna have to wrap up, which I'm devastated about. Corey Ferguson saying that we are Facebook famous, and then it makes her want to compare. Hi, Corey, as well as Cliff, who just says that you're making lots of really great points. Cliff was on our very first episode of Crazy Talk, so his praise comes highly valued.
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you.
All right, so just kind of to wrap up the conversation, we still have 5 minutes left, but if people want to kind of engage in their own self-care, or, maybe someone has made a New Year's resolution and they're like, okay, what do I do now? Because Kerri has told me that I'm setting myself up for failure. What next steps would you like to see kind of other people take in terms of improving their self-care or improving their self-compassion? Like what can people do next if they're feeling inspired by this conversation?
There's so many great things they can do. Share the story with someone else, right? To me, that's the best thing in the world. Like if you've been inspired by something, share it, right? Because then maybe somebody else will get a little inspiration, which is awesome. If people are thinking, oh, gee, I would like to work one-on-one, they can reach me via my Facebook page or, my website. And for those who are, tuning in from distances, I do online counseling. So for folks who are traveling or, not close by. One of the great things, though, that I've been working on and I'm excited about, and you had the opportunity to experience recently, is I do a program on compassion fatigue and professional burnout. And I've developed those into like kind of short sessions and also like half-day sessions. So if someone's really interested in self-compassion, they can reach out and maybe join one of those programs. And I'm really excited. I'm offering a program in the new year, and I'm like rubbing my hands together in excitement. I'm offering 2 really great programs that I'm excited about. One is Girl Power. And it's a program for middle school girls who are struggling with identity and body awareness and body image and self-esteem. And we know that young girls drop out of sports at a higher rate than boys at middle school. And so the program is going to incorporate learning to run with this self-esteem, and the goal being the Shoppers Drug Mart Run for Women in May, which is all about mental health. So I'm really excited about that program that I'll be offering in the new year. And the other program is for women who have had relational traumas, and it's a really exciting program. It's a 1-day program where women can come in and really share their story and learn from other women who have had relational traumas of any variety. And so we really focus in that program about self-compassion and about kind of not engaging in that highlight reel comparison. So those are some programs that are coming up that I'm really excited to share.
Yeah. And I can understand why especially like with my motivational speaking and all that kind of stuff, I work a lot with like middle school and high school populations. And yeah, that especially, and not to bring too much stuff back into this, but especially middle school girls, I feel like they get dismissed a lot. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, it's girl troubles, or it's middle school. Like, get over it. Yeah. And they don't get treated with compassion. And when no one else around you is treating you with compassion, it can be difficult for you to treat yourself with compassion.
So I'm really excited about that opportunity for girls to validate themselves and to validate each other in a peer group, right? To kind of break from that mean girl paradigm into something more supportive and engaging and passionate.
Yeah. Well, that sounds terrific. I'm really excited for you, and just thank you so much for being on the show, as well as for all the work that you do. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. So thank you so much, Kerri. For those of you who want to get in touch with Kerri, I will be putting the link to her website in the comments below. So it's Coverdale Counseling and Consulting.
That's the one.
There we go. Want to get it right. And yeah, I'll be putting a link in the comments. Thanks everyone so much for tuning in. This has been a really great conversation. Thanks for everyone who left comments. If you loved this conversation, if you want to hear more crazy talk conversations about mental health, you can like me on Facebook at facebook.com/LeeThomasSpeaks. Our next crazy talk will be again at 12:30 Atlantic time. On facebook.com/LeeThomasSpeaks. We're going to have our guest Chelsea Hicks back on. I know Chelsea Hicks was supposed to be on a couple weeks ago. We had some technical difficulties, but we're going to make it work this time. So thanks everyone for tuning in so much, and we will see you next week. Bye.